On today's episode of the Rainmaker Family Show, we had the one and only Rachel Earp. Her and her husband Dale own Earp Enterprise companies, which are multiple brands, but with one very powerful mission, which is bringing value and creating legacy. They serve communities, businesses, seniors, and veterans nationwide. They have two seven-figure businesses. And on today's show, Rachel and I really dove in together all about our entrepreneurial journey. On the episode, it was actually her 14-year wedding anniversary. Yay. Congratulations, Rachel. She just reflected on the last 14 years being business owners. And we talked about the power of having boundaries for you and your family, that as women, sometimes we often say, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. And how that like vocabulary and language really isn't always necessary. Um, all the way from talking about the time where she had to step in and be a really supportive spouse while her husband was going through some very severe anxiety. So we covered a whole spectrum, but I think you're going to be inspired. I just found myself again and again leaning into Rachel's story, to her tenacity, to her perseverance, and just showing that entrepreneurship can bring so much freedom and flexibility to your life, but it's also filled with ups and downs, and really to embrace the hard and the good, and to really thrive in all seasons. So I think you're going to enjoy this episode. This was actually a solo episode where I just interviewed Rachel, and it was very powerful. So if you liked it, make sure to share with a friend, tag one of us on social media. We'd love to connect with you. So Rainmakers, get your pen and paper out. You're going to love this episode. Welcome, Rainmakers. I am so excited to have a friend on the show, somebody who I think you're going to learn a lot, another mama who's in business, another boy mom. But Rachel, I'm so excited to have you on. Welcome to the Rainmaker Family Show.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to our conversation today, and it's such an honor to be here.
For those of you listening today, as we are recording this podcast episode, it's actually Rachel's wedding anniversary. You told me like before we started recording, congratulations, that's a huge deal. But you told me like you even did like an Instagram post recently, how you were just like reflecting on your life and just where you guys are at and where you came from. And so I would just love for you to kind of start there with like your marriage, and like what are some of the biggest lessons that even like you're learning this week, or what are some of the biggest reflections that you were having this week leading up to your 14 wedding anniversary?
Oh my goodness, I love that. It's funny how you come to a place in your life where you look at everything that you have, and when you're in certain seasons, we kind of talked about this before the show, but I think it's so important to remember that we are where we are now, and sometimes we prayed for those things that maybe are frustrating us, or the storms are coming and we're in transition. And I came across this old photo of me and my husband when our first year of marriage, and we had come through so much even just to be together, which is like a whole big story that is maybe for another time. But I looked at us, and we're so young, and we had absolutely no money when we got married. We didn't have a wedding. We actually spent our wedding night, we went through the McDonald's drive-through, ordering from the dollar menu because we couldn't afford anything else. And we giggle about that now. And I look at all God has blessed us with, and we stayed together through a lot of storms and trials. So I'm incredibly grateful today that, you know, I can take the time to pause and remember where we came from. And I'm just thankful for this season and 14 years that, we have gotten to go through so much together.
That's amazing. Congratulations. This last year was 11 years for us.
Um,
So you guys are a little further ahead, but every year, I think after like I even like, well, every year I'm just like, wow, another year. Like, look at how much we've grown. But 14 years, that feels like close to 20 years, which is also so exciting. So you guys are amazing. But I would love to know, you guys have multiple companies now that you have are super successful in a lot of different industries. You guys have been doing business for a while. But what was it like to start, or did you guys start a business together, or was it one of you over the other, or what did that look like in those early stages of starting your businesses?
Oh my goodness. Well, so I'll preface it by saying I'm a former preschool teacher, if that tells you about my nature and my personality. When we first started our companies, it actually was completely it originated from my husband, Dale. I was working at a hospital system at the time, and he has always been very driven, very entrepreneurial. Started working his first job with a little paper route in Philadelphia at 9 years old. And he's
Mhm.
just had him and I are very different. We've had a completely different walk in life. So when he came and told me that he wanted to start his own company, it was very daunting to me. And I was a little bit afraid of what that would look like. But I trusted him because I knew that everything he put his heart into always worked out so well. I continued on working my job, not really interested too much in what he was doing. And then my life changed, and I ended up having to go on disability due to complications with our pregnancy with our first baby. So I was on bed rest and not able to go back to my position at the hospital. And during that time, I finally looked at my husband and I was like, "Well, what is it that you actually do?" And by that point, he started our first company at our dining room table.
Wow.
And we opened a marketing organization for insurance products. So basically, insurance companies like United Healthcare, for example, and all different carriers for life, health, and Medicare use us to put contracts so that we have agencies and agents all over the country that are positioned under us. And then we help train them and help them with their marketing, with all of the different products. So we started with 3 agents, and like I said, in our just right outside of our home, and we grew very quickly. We now have over 2,000 agents that we manage
Wow.
nationally, but it didn't start out as a glamorous. In fact, I really did not like insurance at all. And I decided, at this point, he was like, "Well, why don't you get licensed and do this with me, and we'll do this together." So I decided to take a state exam and get licensed. I failed the state exam twice. And at that point, we had to actually drive 3.5 hours for me to take the test. Now, mind you, I was a straight A college student on the dean's list, had a college degree,
Wow.
and he barely graduated high school. And he passed it with flying colors the first time.
Oh, I would be so
I
frustrated. I'd be
was.
like, "What?"
I was so mad. I looked at him and I was like, can't be right. And not to mention how far it took, for him to drive me down there. So I took it again, failed it again, finally realized that I was actually overthinking everything, which I do all the time. And that was what had caused me to miss those questions on the exam. But at the time, it's funny because I look back and I thought, oh, this wasn't meant to be. At this point, I'm just
Mhm.
going to take it because I'm mad and I want to prove that I can pass the
Yeah.
stupid exam. And here I am 14 years later, and we're still doing this together. And I've grown so much. And it goes to show, I always tell people, just because something doesn't work out perfectly the first time doesn't mean it wasn't meant to be. So it's kind of a little bit. Yeah.
Wow, there's so many things in there that I want to dive into. I think the first one is I know that you were a little bit more hesitant as far as being the entrepreneur. I know that was more like Dale jumping right in. And I would say, like, that's very similar to mine and Steven's story. He's always been very entrepreneurial. I thought I would be the one with the stable job, the stable career, healthcare. Like, I'm not messing around. And then I get a little taste of this entrepreneurial life and having, no ceiling as far as like what you're able to make financially. I mean, depending on what vehicle you choose. And just like all of this, like, freedom and flexibility. I think that's what I was so drawn to
Yeah.
and not wanting to be put into a box. And so that's what um, allowed me to kind of like join him in entrepreneurship. But what advice, because I think there's a lot of mamas that come into our community that are wanting to start their maybe first business or second business, and they're trying to get buy-in from their partner or from their spouse. What would you suggest to those women who are maybe listening who are like, oh, I want to start this thing, but I'm not sure? Like, how do you think they could encourage probably their husband to agree with them to do a business venture?
That's a great question. You know, it's interesting because I was kind of on the other end of it where my husband had to talk me into but
Yeah.
looking back at it now, one thing that he did was I I knew he had done his research. I also knew that he was very serious and intentional about the processes that he was already planning. And even though we stumbled through a lot of things, we made plenty of mistakes. He didn't go into it thinking, well, this is all going to be perfect and everything's going to be an instant success and we're just going to be overnight millionaires. It
Yeah.
doesn't.
Wouldn't that be
Right,
nice?
I
Yeah.
know, and I think a lot of times people look at entrepreneurs and they look at the life that you have now. They see everything on social media, everything that you worked many years, many nights,
Mhm.
burning the candle at both ends, and they think it just all magically appears, and it really doesn't. We struggled
Yeah.
a lot when we first started, but we were willing to make the sacrifice, and I think if you're, looking to kind of pitch your idea to a spouse or and it could be anyone in your life that you really want them to understand. I think you have to first go into it with confidence, knowing that, hey, I'm not doing this on a whim. This is something I
Mhm.
feel called and passionate about. Here's what the outcomes that we could have. And I just want
Mhm.
you to trust me and just be on the same page. And don't
Mhm.
set unrealistic expectations from the other person to where they feel that they're having to give, give, and give, and maybe they're not in a place in their own personal life where they can do that at that moment. My husband gave me space to kind
Mhm.
of process it, I
Yeah.
watched, I observed. I didn't jump in right away. And now we work
Mhm.
together. We're a husband and wife team, and we do absolutely everything together. And I'm so grateful for that. And that has been a huge blessing where we were able to raise our children being in it. We took our children
Mhm.
to all our different business adventures and they grew with that and they have learned with.
Mhm.
And now we homeschool as well. And like you mentioned, the flexibility and the freedom to really design what you want your family life to look like, what you want your relationship with your spouse to look like. And knowing that, there were all those different things that we had within reach, then it gave me
Mhm.
so much more motivation to be like, you know what? Let's do this and let's do this together because there's power in unity. And that
Mhm.
is one thing that I think he recognized was, and it doesn't mean you always are going to do everything together. You might both
Yeah.
have different callings and vocations and skills and career
Mhm.
paths. But when you're in unity and you can support each other, I would say that's the most important thing is just support your spouse.
That's amazing. I want to talk a little bit about you're sharing kind of like how you guys got into business and how you, were a super diligent student and then you go to take this not real estate, but insurance. Thank you. Insurance test and you fail and you're so frustrated because like your husband didn't have as good a grades as you and all these things. And you said a phrase of like, just because you fail at something once doesn't mean you're supposed to quit. I think you said it more eloquently than that. I would love for you to touch on that because I think there's so many entrepreneurs that maybe the first time, and I see this, even in e-commerce, it's like you launch your first product and maybe it doesn't take off as quickly or like the way that you intended. And there's lots of variables that go into things, but how do you stay persistent when you feel like, man, I just feel like really defeated? Like, should I give up? Like, what would you say out of encouragement out of your, 14 years of entrepreneurship and the ups and downs? What would some encouragement that you would have for them?
I love that question. If I could give myself advice, and kind of talk to the younger me at that moment, I would first off say that you have to really tune out all the other voices and the distraction. And I had a lot of, like I mentioned, a very different background. My dad was blue collar. My mom was a stay at home mom. And so the concept of being an entrepreneur or starting a business, opening a company, corporation, whatever that looked like, was very foreign to me. And it just seemed like this big void. Like, how could this all come together? And I think too,
Mhm.
like for my background, it was hard because I came from a very Christian family where at sometimes if things didn't work out the first time, it was taken as maybe it was a sign from God that it shouldn't be that way and it wasn't meant to be. And that's an easy trap to fall into because there's two
Yeah.
totally different spectrums on that. And yes, sometimes God is putting a block in your path because he knows
Mhm.
that that is not the ultimate goodness that he wants to give you and bless you with. So he'll redirect us. But more often than not, actually, the harder the things are, usually the more beautiful and more wonderful they are for your life. And there's many examples of
Mhm.
this in God's word too, where, things didn't come easy, things didn't happen magically the first time. So for me and my frustration and my
Mhm.
embarrassment, having to look my husband in the eye and say, I failed, I failed. There was a lot of different emotions centered around that. And I had to lay aside my pride and I had to get real with myself. What did I really want this? Whether it was for long term or short term. At the moment, it was short term. I just want to pass the test. And I realized, yes, I do. And I've worked hard and I know the stuff. I know the material. I'm not, it's not like I hadn't prepared for it. So I think
Mhm.
sometimes it's breaking it down into the smaller things. Okay, what's the first hurdle that you have to get past? And maybe the outcome, the bigger picture might look differently or might seem obscure, but if you worked this hard, you don't turn back on all of that work. And
Mhm.
that phrase where, you come too far to go back and all of that,
Mhm.
that's kind of where I
Yeah.
was. And I think a lot of people can relate to that because don't just give up and on your dream or on your goals as a family or as a couple just because it didn't work out the first time or it was hard. Or even that you
Mhm.
failed and made a mistake because we learn from those. And God used
Mhm.
that moment as a teacher, a former teacher at the time,
Mhm.
as an academic, I always did so well to humble me, and it gave me a whole new appreciation of what my husband went through. He barely graduated high school. He had a horrible experience in the streets of Philly and things that he went through that I never went through, but he
Mhm.
passed it because he was determined, and
Mhm.
he wanted this so much. So, perspective is everything, and I would say the
Mhm.
most important thing to remember is your perspective and your why.
Absolutely. We like to say every problem comes with possibilities attached. And whenever there's a problem, either in business or in your personal life, or there's some kind of tension in your family, it's like, all right, every problem comes with a possibility
Mm,
attached. And
so good.
that I say that so easily, like it just rolls off my tongue. And I know in the moment it's sometimes easier said than done. Like it's a choice. We have to willingly step into a mindset shift, really, of like, how can I overcome this? How can I work through this? Because there really is beauty and strength on the other side. And when you come up against adversity, and we can just talk straight to business, when you come up against a problem, that you've never experienced before, that's frustrating, that probably has some kind of financial implication, it can feel really scary. But when you learn to resolve that, both in your spirit, but then also in whatever strategy that you're given more authority in your business.
Yeah.
And I've seen this time and time again with our Amazon students, like, and even us as well. Like, I remember one day, we we had launched a product and we had done something wrong with a coupon code um, that lost us a lot of money that day, but thankfully we caught it. And because of that, that was something that we now teach on, is like, hey, learn from our mistakes so that you don't lose thousands of dollars. And although at the time it was really awful, and like we did recoup some of the money, but it's like now we have this amazing lesson that we can now teach our students. And if you're listening to this and are a student, like, don't worry, that has changed a lot. So you're good. But I just think like it gave us authority to be able to see around the corner when others couldn't, because we had walked through it. And it really is all about perspective.
So true. In fact, it's funny you
Yeah.
said that because now what I ended up moving into with, as far as my role within our company as we continue to grow was helping new agents with the licensing part and training new
Wow.
agents. So I always would tell them, hey, if I can pass you, because they, it's stressful. People were nervous. I had one agent, he failed it 6 times. Made me feel so much better about I felt so
Yes.
bad, but you know what? I was so proud of him because he did
Yeah.
not give up, and he ended up being one of our top producing agents out of our
Wow.
organization, and he was just someone that struggled with passing tests. He got test anxiety, and he was a brilliant, brilliant, person that just he killed it with what he was doing,
Yeah.
and we knew
Amazing.
if he could just, just don't give up, don't give up. So it's so
Mhm.
true, sometimes those things are how tools that we can use to help and teach others.
Absolutely. Yeah. I would love to know, Rachel, like what your role in your businesses are and how did you develop those skills or know what is like the best use of your time, because Stephen and I, like, we run our businesses together. We always have for the most part. I mean, I think he takes the lead on certain things and I'll take the lead, but it really has been this ever evolving process of us figuring that out. So I would love to know, like, how have you and Dale like maneuvered that throughout the years? We get asked all the time, what are your favorite books? So we put together a quick free download of the top 15 most influential books that helped us grow a 7-figure business by age 30.
The cool part about this list is they're actually sequential, from the ones we read at the very beginning to the ones that are impacting our lives right now. With the list, we also have the hookup for audible.com, where you can usually listen to the books on a walk or while doing the dishes. This is my favorite way to consume books. If you want the list, go to rainmakerfamily.com/deals. We also have a link to Audible there so you can listen to the books on the go. Again, that's rainmakerfamily.com/deals.
That has been a work in progress, and
Mhm.
the more time that you spend together, there's gonna be times where you're gonna clash or that you're gonna maybe feel that you should sweep in and do something. And one of the things that I've learned is I really wanna focus on the things I'm really good at. And
Mhm.
for my husband and I, we work so well together because we are completely opposite. So the areas I'm more of the creative, the writer, the more behind the scenes, orchestrating everything. Originally developed our first website and wrote all of the content and the copy before AI and
Wow.
all those things that are out today. We had to do everything the hard way and developed our social media platforms. And like I
Wow.
mentioned, education was my background. So I loved
Yeah.
teaching. I loved, educating new agents and new clients. So as I learned to evolve in my own skills and learn of my new skills that I didn't know that I had, one thing that worked very well once we figured it out was let's both focus on what we're really good at. And instead of me trying to come in and maybe take on something that he was better at, but I could do, I was better off working on the things that he wasn't so good at, that I was.
Mhm.
And when we started doing that, everything came together so beautifully and we grew a lot quicker because we weren't butting heads as often. And I've had a lot of people
Mhm.
say, well, how do you work with your spouse? Like, I couldn't do it. We'd be fighting all
Mhm.
the time. And, we've
Yeah.
had our moments because it is hard and I think the hardest part of that was separating where it always was. It's not like you go to work and you leave it at work. It filtered into our home life, our everyday things, conversation, dinner time, nighttime, first thing in the morning. When you run businesses and you're doing it together, it was hard for us sometimes to separate and step out of it a little bit to take time for our relationship. That our
Mhm.
relationship wasn't wrapped up in that identity of this, our companies and our businesses that we were working so hard to build. And there were times where it did get kind of muddled together, but
Mhm.
we realized at the end of the day, our relationship was the most important thing. And that had to
Mhm.
come first. Our children had to come first. And when we aligned our priorities and we started creating boundaries with people and setting more clear expectations on, business hours for us versus business hours for our office, and
Mhm.
being flexible when we needed to. Once again, flexibility is super important. And, for some
Mhm.
people, that's really hard is being flexible. And my husband is very much a on schedule, like, he plans out every single part of his day right down to when he works out, when he eats lunch, when we're gonna have a talk about this. I'm getting on his schedule.
Yeah.
I'm like, "Let's just spontaneous, let's go for a
Yeah.
drive, let's go grab lunch now," like, but
Yeah.
it works really well together. I always tell him I'm the string to his kite.
I love that.
Yeah.
That's good. What are some of the boundaries that you have that you guys have in place when it comes to work and your family time? Stephen and I are very similar. Like our marriage has to come first, our kids have to come first. And there have been moments, even in the last month, where it was like, man, I broke one of my own boundaries that I am really passionate about. Like we got into reactivity mode one time and stepped into business when we should have been with family. And I was like, I just remember like right afterwards I did beat myself up for it and I've like it was just like hard to say like I stand for this and then you still so I'm just putting that out there of like I'm sure Rachel and I would say like neither one of us is perfect
Yeah.
at this all the time, but I would love to hear what is working well for you guys and what you feel like are the best boundaries right now for you and your family.
Well, with boundaries, it's very important to understand that when you're creating a boundary, think of taking out a piece of paper and drawing a line. You can draw a very firm, bold line, or it could be a dotted line or a very faint, like, I think this needs to be a
Mm,
boundary and I'm going to put this out here. But,
yeah.
you're leaving that gray space. So
Mhm.
I think it's important to first define like what are the non-negotiables for your family, and whether that be
Mhm.
your dinner time, whether that be bedtime routine with the kids, quality time with date nights with your spouse, whatever that looks like.
Mhm.
Those need to be non-negotiable. Not to say, like you mentioned, we're not going to have times where we don't always keep those. I've done that plenty of times, and yeah, it's very.
Mhm.
You feel terrible about it, and it's like, oh, like,
Yeah.
but I think the biggest challenge for us was, not people are not always going to respect your boundaries if you don't respect them. And we
That's
found our
good.
struggle was, well, maybe an agent needed help at a certain time of the day, or it was dinner time and we got a knock on the door and this happened, or fires were, all of these things where people were like, well, encroaching upon our time.
Yeah.
And we would cave, thinking we had to as entrepreneurs, and to keep our business
Mhm.
growing and flourishing, we had to cave and we had to conform our life to what everybody else wanted from us. And that included even outside family, where
Mhm.
family did, like parents or siblings or whoever, friends didn't understand. So,
Mhm.
because they didn't understand, we would change our boundaries. And that's a big mistake that I learned the hard way is if people don't understand, that's okay. You don't have to live your
Yeah.
life explaining why you have a certain boundary or why you had to do that and why you're so protective of that time. Your time
Mhm.
is the most precious gift that God gives you. It's time, and that's
Mhm.
worth more
Yeah.
than anything money can buy. So,
Yeah.
if your time is spent investing into things that are draining your energy, that are taking you away from precious time with your little kids or your spouse while you're young and you're feeling good and you're not older and at retirement age and you can, your bones are starting to hurt and you
Yeah.
can't do enjoy life,
Yeah.
life is meant to be enjoyed. And we got to a point in our businesses where we weren't enjoying it anymore. We were
Mm.
burnt out. My husband was got because there were not good boundaries, he started
Mhm.
suffering from severe anxiety, crippling anxiety, where he couldn't function anymore. And when I saw my husband that was so strong and always like, go, 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 on the move, very fierce, and nothing seemed to ever bother him. And there was a time where he literally couldn't get up off the floor and couldn't breathe and couldn't
Wow.
drive, couldn't do
Wow.
anything. I stopped in my tracks and I realized this isn't worth it. We need to change. We need to create these boundaries. And I think that was the biggest thing that was an epiphany for us. And it was a very difficult journey for us. It was a dark time for us. It was hard to watch him suffer like that. I felt very helpless. But wow, did that awaken both of us. And it opened our eyes to the importance of protecting that time, and he was able to come out of it, and he has been able to help a lot of people because it happens quicker than you think. Sometimes you're in it and you're like, I'll be all right one more day. And,
Yeah.
I'll let this slide one more time. And it's those little things that add up to where sometimes it hits you like a ton of bricks, and it hit him hard, and none of us are perfect and none of us are without, those things happening sometimes. So, take the words of advice from those who have been there, and I love that
Yeah.
you guys do this with your show and really try to encourage and help people that are looking at, whether they're new and they're venturing into this for the first time. I just think it's important to remember that your time is valuable, your life is valuable, your family, you are valuable. So do everything
Yeah.
that you can to protect it and build, and you'll find a balance. You can definitely achieve a
Mhm.
balance, but it's not something that happens overnight.
I think what you said about not letting other people's expectations twist or turn your own boundaries, like that is so important. And not having to always explain yourself or apologize. I think women, we apologize a lot. That's one I've been really trying to catch myself on my own language patterns, even if it's just a random text to a friend, like, oh, I'm sorry I didn't get back to you. And I've had to be like, wait, am I really sorry? And it's just like, well, I guess, like, I mean, it sounds mean that I'm not sorry, but I'm not sorry because I chose not to,
Yeah.
because I chose to go to bed early and not be on my phone when I was with my kids.
Yeah.
So I just think like we apologize, or we try
Yeah.
and twist and bend because we don't want to offend. And I think that oftentimes, like, we just don't need to fall down that of like caring so much about what other people think or allowing other people to dictate our decisions. It's like we have to do what's best for
Oh,
us. So,
absolutely.
yeah.
I was in that trap for many years, and my husband actually pointed it out to me because I apologize for everything. If I tripped
Yeah.
on the road and got in your way because I
Yeah.
tripped, I was sorry. Like, I was sorry about
Mhm.
everything. And
Yes.
the thing you have to ask yourself is, do you need to feel sorry? Like, is that
Mhm.
something that you can deliberately and intentionally did, or was this something that came up that wasn't your fault, that was beyond your control? And when you start setting a pattern with people where they expect you to apologize for everything and they know that you're always going to feel bad, they're going to recognize that, and it's going to drain you very quickly. And
Mhm.
yes, there's times where an apology is appropriate, but we don't have to
Mhm.
apologize for, prior honoring our priorities or honoring our
Mhm.
family or all of those things. You don't have to say you're sorry for that. So I
Mhm.
know, like you said, we struggle. And I think as women especially, we have that
Mhm.
tendency to always feel so bad because we are caring and more nurturing and all those things. But just give
Mhm.
yourself permission to, do what you need to do. Just do it. Do the
Mhm.
thing.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. I would love to hear more about your journey with, I know you said that your husband got super depressed really quickly. It just kind of happened. How did you support him or help him come out of that? Because I think that there's probably people listening to the show who have experienced severe anxiety, depression, have had moments like your husband, or I'm sure there are women listening too that maybe their spouse is in a place, or a friend, or postpartum depression is something I think so many people like know of and have experienced. Like, what would some of your advice be to someone? Like, how do you come alongside of somebody who is in such a hard place? And I know it affected you as well, being like a spouse there, but like, are there any like tools or resources that really helped you guys get through that really rocky patch?
Well, the first thing is I think it's important to have compassion. And
Mm.
it's easy when you see, especially if you're looking at it with your spouse, to think, well, why don't you fix it? Just stop, just
Mhm.
stop. Like, it's so easy. And at first I feel bad about it now, but I thought, well, what is your problem, Dale? Like, just tell people no, or, just take some stuff off your plate. And I didn't think about the amount of responsibility that he was feeling, doing what God was calling him to do and providing, and the responsibility of having employees and offices. And there were a lot of things that he didn't tell me was on his plate that I didn't even notice because I was caught up in
Mhm.
my thing and all of my overwhelm.
Yeah.
And having compassion for other people when they're going through something like that is very important. You don't want them to feel like what they're feeling isn't valid. And
Mhm.
making sure that you let them know that it's okay to feel what you're feeling. I am here for you, and just sit with them in it. There were times I would literally just sit and I wouldn't say anything to him, and I would just put my arm around his shoulders and just rub his shoulders and just tell him it's everything's gonna be okay. Everything's gonna be okay. Reassuring words. Words are so powerful. And when you
Mhm.
can say a word and it be the right word at that time, it doesn't have to be something fancy, but mean it. Give people
Mhm.
meaningful words of encouragement. And that's why I'm so passionate about encouraging others, because we live in a world that is very discouraging. People are negative, people are selfish, people will literally suck all of the energy and joy out of your life and not feel bad for it at all. And I
Yeah.
watched people were the biggest part of his anxiety, and the
Mm.
the the struggles that he went through was very just being around very negative and unkind people that were close to him, that should have had his back, that should have been there for him, that we expected would care, and they really didn't. So that was a hard thing to process, and part of processing and getting through it is recognizing these people don't need to continue using me and my
Mm.
time and my family, because him being in that state was altering his ability to be the best husband that he would have wanted, or be the best dad that he wanted to his children, and I knew he didn't wanna be that way. And then the other thing besides just, compassion and being there and saying words of affirmation and reassurance is there came a point where I said enough was enough and I stepped in,
Mm.
and I had a
Mhm.
very, um, hard conversation with him, and I said, "You need to get help, and you need help. It's okay, Dale. Like,
Mhm.
it's okay
Mhm.
to need help." Because he felt like he had to be this Superman that did everything and never received. He was so used to giving and giving and giving that receiving
Wow.
help was hard for him. And I
Mhm.
realized it was hard and that I needed to say, you know what? I'm not going to allow you to self destruct, because I love you too much. I love us too much. And that was
Mhm.
hard for me to say, and there are a lot of things that happened afterward that, I had to take initiative on that felt very uncomfortable for me, that was against my nature and our roles. I had to take on roles that I had never done before. But I knew that God would give me the grace to do that in that moment, because that's what God needed and required of me, and that was what my husband needed. And it didn't stay that way forever. I was able to settle back, and, he's come out on the other side strong, I would say, honestly, stronger than ever, because he has learned the hard way, that he had to take care of himself.
Wow. So much wisdom to unpack there and so gentle. I feel like Rachel, I could listen to you speak for hours. You just have such a beautiful, like calming voice. And I just appreciate everything you shared, from marriage, from where you guys have been to the different roles in your business and what those boundaries look like, and how we don't need to please other people, and how we don't need to say we're sorry all the time either, and then ending with just how you and your husband got through some really challenging times. I think that's just going to really inspire so many women listening to this. If anybody listening wants to connect more with you, or even tune into you, I know you have an amazing podcast as well. What is the best way that they can connect with you?
Well, thank you so much. I just want to say too, I appreciate you giving us the space to share our lessons and our stories. And your family is such a beautiful inspiration as well. So I appreciate you so much. And as far as I love being able to connect with people. That's something I try to show up in a lot of different ways. I would say the main thing would be my favorite place is Instagram. And you can find me at Rachery. It's RACH for Rachel, and then EREE, which happened to be my nickname when I was a little girl.
Oh,
So
cute.
over there, and yes, I enjoy podcasting as well. My podcast is Heels, Handbags, and Hustle.
Love
It's
it.
primarily a female audience that I speak to. And yeah, just you can find me at rachelerp.com. And that's normally where I update life updates and things that's going on in our world and what we're doing to impact and all the things. But yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much again, Rachel, for being on the show. And if this message of what we talked about inspired you, if you feel like others should be listening, go ahead and share this podcast episode on Instagram and tag Rachel and I. We would love to hear from you. We would love to connect. And as always, Rainmakers, thank you so much for tuning in. We'll see you next week on another episode. Thank you for listening to another episode of the Rainmaker Family Show. If you're not a part of our mastermind yet, I want to say I think you're missing out. Our heart here at Rainmaker is to create total abundance for you. That's why we're offering a free one-on-one family freedom design session for you, our faithful listener.
Yeah, if you want to hop on a call with our team, see if it's a good fit to build a business that creates time freedom for you, financial abundance, and helps you leave that thriving family legacy. That's what we're all about in our mastermind. You can grab a time on our team's calendar at rainmakerfamily.com/mastermind. Again, that's rainmakerfamily.com/mastermind.